Well, Israeli Prime Minister Netanyahu is taking issue with something that Palestinian President Mahmoud Abbas told President Trump at the White House. Now, first, let's hear what Mr. Abbas, in his own words, said on Wednesday.
Mr. President, I affirm to you that we are raising our youth, our children, our grandchildren on a culture of peace, and we are endeavoring to bring about security, freedom, and peace for our children to live like the other children in the world, along with the Israeli children in peace, freedom, and security.
And now Prime Minister Netanyahu's response. Well, he stopped short of directly calling Abbas a liar, but he was not going to let this slide. And here's the Prime Minister in our Prime Cut.
I heard President Abbas yesterday say that Palestinians teach their children peace. That's unfortunately not true. They named their schools after mass murderers of Israelis. And they pay terrorists.
All right, let's get more from Israel. i24 joins us from our world headquarters in Tel Aviv. And Mahmoud Abbas, according to the Prime Minister, lied to President Trump. He does have facts to substantiate it. What exactly was he referring to?
Well, Michelle, as you saw, he did really stop short of calling the Palestinian president a liar. He said his comment about raising children to a culture of peace is, quote, not true. He did insist that schools are being named after mass murderers of Israelis and that the Palestinian Authority still pays money to the families of terrorists. Now, Netanyahu added that he does pursue a genuine peace deal. That's a very interesting way to close that argument about the Palestinian president being virtually a liar. Now, what Netanyahu was really trying to achieve, Michelle, in this comment was to discredit Abbas in Trump's eyes and the eyes of the world. Trump is making Abbas an essential player in this peace process. He hasn't been an essential player in the process or virtually in anything for quite some time, and Netanyahu wants to make sure Netanyahu and Israel don't lose any ground when they come to the negotiating table with the president, Michelle.
And the Prime Minister, of course, also referring to those Palestinian textbooks, the curriculum which teaches children to hate and to demonize and to basically seek the destruction of Israel. So that's what he was referring to there at large. Now, in the meantime, we have Abbas saying that he wants to meet with Netanyahu. What are the details there?
Well, Michelle, that happened Wednesday. The president of the Palestinian Authority suggested that Prime Minister Netanyahu was avoiding direct talks that could resurrect the peace process. Now, what Abbas said was that they had planned to meet in Moscow, but Netanyahu didn't show up. Now, there's a bad date, if I've ever heard one, alone in Moscow. This was, though, in reference to the Russian effort to set up a meeting last year. Netanyahu and Abbas have repeatedly declared their willingness for face-to-face meetings, and they've blamed each other throughout the time for avoiding that September 2016 meetup in Moscow. The problem, Michelle, remains the same. Abbas wants to internationalize the talks. He knows he'll have more sway if world powers are involved, some of whom really support the Palestinian efforts. Netanyahu wants none of this, though. He wants direct talks, only direct talks, and those haven't taken place in a while, Michelle.
All right, i24, thank you so much as always. Well, let's bring in Dr. Jasser. He is the founder and president of the American Islamic Forum for Democracy, and he's also host for the Blaze Radio podcast, Reform This. Dr. Jasser, thanks for being with us. Let's get straight to it, Doctor. What is your takeaway from the president's meeting with Abbas?
Well, I have to tell you, on the one hand, it's always refreshing to give a new president sort of that honeymoon period to reboot, to bring the parties to the table, but I had wished there was a third party he could have brought. I think for decades we've proven that both Fatah and Hamas are not honest brokers in peace, and ultimately they will bring the same old, as Prime Minister Netanyahu said, the same old hate, the same old intransigence, and I'm a bit concerned of the fact that President Trump now has legitimized as an unassailable representative of the Palestinians, Abbas and the Fatah. And I'm sorry, and the PLO and all of the side of the equation. And I've been, as a reformer, we've always been hoping that there would be a third pathway, an Arab awakening that would come inside the Palestinian movement to marginalize both extremes, as we've seen in Egypt and Syria and Yemen and elsewhere. I think that's the only pathway, but to use the same old linkage that other presidents have done, which is to link solutions in the Middle East to an Israeli-Palestinian peace accord to a radicalized Palestinian leadership is a bit far-fetched.
And that has been the foreign policy for decades, as you said, going back to the Palestinian Authority. But in the meantime, there's a big power struggle between Hamas and Fatah in the West Bank. Abbas is trying to consolidate power over there. Is that something that you think he could accomplish?
I think time has shown that whenever he tries to accomplish it, he does it by becoming more militant, more radicalized, more an appeaser of the Hamas charter, which is genocidal against the Israeli state, against the Jews. And this is why you see so much of the educational system teaching Palestinians not to love, but to hate. And because this type of demonization of the Jews and the other has served to rally up the base, if you will, for both sides. And while Abbas might be more moderate than Hamas, there's been no evidence to show that there's been any effort at reform from both sides of the equation. There has been no third pathway, and I don't think bringing them to the table and legitimizing them. I was glad to hear President Trump articulate at the press conference that he expects Abbas to condemn terrorism more clearly and more unequivocally. But I don't think they're addressing the underpinnings of radicalization, which are the influence of Hamas and other Islamist movements in the media and in the propaganda that's making the Palestinians more militant.
So, Dr. Jasser, then you support what Prime Minister Netanyahu said in response to Abbas saying that he told President Trump that the Palestinians teach their children to seek peace. So you agree that Prime Minister Netanyahu had a point there?
Absolutely. I mean, you need to only pay attention briefly to any random evidence of the Palestinian media, of their social media, what YouTube hits get hit to the millions versus the ones that are just sort of scattered. See what the footprint is on social media, what's taught in some of the mosques there. There is no evidence that there's been any type of moderating peaceful movement, but rather the security of Israel has only been at the more security stage rather than a moderation of the Palestinian movement. And I would think it's sort of, as a Syrian American, it's amazing to me that we're spending this much time on the Palestinian conflict that doesn't have honest brokers for peace on the Palestinian side, while you see what's happening in Syria, in Libya, in Yemen, in Egypt, and elsewhere, where I think until those countries start to democratize and Islamists are marginalized in the region, the Palestinians will continue to be dominated by Islamists and then the apologists like Abbas.
All right. Thank you so much for your insight, Dr. Judy Jasser. Thanks again.